Okay, colleagues, we'll start the meeting in 1 minute. On va commencer la réunion dans 1 minute. Okay, good afternoon, colleagues. For the benefit of those joining us online, the Finance and Economic Development Committee just met in camera in order to receive a presentation on the LRT legal updates, stage 1 and 2. These matters will not be reported out as they relate to 13.1E litigation or potential litigation affecting the city, and 13.1F, the receiving of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. During the in-camera session, no votes were taken other than procedural motions and/or directions. And for members of the media who have questions on LRT issues that were talked about today, Steve Kanalakis and John Manconi will both be available. So we have a couple of items that were held. We'll go to one that's as one person that wishes to speak. A comprehensive asset management number 9 policy and framework update. Angela Keller-Herzog of Cafes would like to speak. So we'll ask her to come in. This is on item number 9, comprehensive asset management policy and framework.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of order. Are we not able to ask questions to staff on the open session presentation on the LRT?
Yeah, you could. My understanding was that most of those were done in camera. So is this an out of camera question you have?
Yes, I left my questions for in-camera items for the in-camera items.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I suppose my question...
Sorry, maybe what I can suggest, because we just have one speaker for this and it would free up staff, why don't we just ask Angela Keller-Herzog to speak and then we'll go back to you.
That's fine, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so Ms. Keller-Herzog, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm waiting for my visual presentation. Okay, here we are. So my name is Angela Keller-Herzog and I'm here representing Cafes, the Community Associations for Environmental Sustainability. Next slide, please. Cafes, I think, is familiar to many of you. We're founded in 2010, and we're a network currently numbering just over 200 citizens from over 60 different community associations and citizens associations. Next slide, please. This is an overview of my presentation. I'll be speaking to the link between climate change and capital asset management. Next slide, please. So how do these two issues connect? And I'll go right down into the weeds because that's where we need to go. So we need to calculate the carbon costs and climate risks of different asset choices. We need to ensure that we don't invest in fossil fuel infrastructure, which would then result in carbon lock-in. This is a simple but important concept to get. So if your furnace goes kablink and you need to replace it, if you were to get a new gas furnace which uses fossil fuel, then you would be subject to a carbon lock-in for the expected life of your furnace. Similarly, if the city purchases a new sub-fleet of diesel buses, then we would be locked in to the fossil fuel consumption over the expected lifespan of those buses. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we need to enter the carbon considerations into asset life cycle considerations. So this would then affect calculations on refurbishment and renewal decisions of our capital stock. So if, for example, we were not on track to meet our carbon targets, we might choose to retire those diesel buses earlier rather than letting them live out their expected lifespan. And thirdly, in resilience, we need to harden the assets as climate risks will increase. We need to build for increasing severity and frequency of climate events. And this includes green infrastructure, where the urban tree canopy affects heat islands and affects storm water absorption. Next slide, please. So how do these issues connect in Ottawa? Again, as most of you are familiar, we have community and corporate emissions targets, and the 2030 targets line up approximately with the 10-year asset management horizon in the documents at hand. The relevant sectors are buildings, fleets, transportation planning, including roads, solid waste, sewage, and green infrastructure. And then a very important linkage also through governance and people. So I'd like to point out that table 2.1 in the asset management plan framework, that's document 2, the key participants from the city do not currently include the climate and resiliency unit. And I think that should be updated. We would recommend that. Next slide, please. So in terms of risks, vulnerabilities, and adaptation, we know that for Ottawa, the climate vulnerability study is late, but coming. And then after that, we will be seeing a resiliency strategy for the city. These are delayed, but in the works. In our sense of reading the documentation, Ottawa is building on an existing risk framework, and the climate risks are being built in. So we have a sense that the spaces are created for us to be on track as we get the updated information on vulnerabilities. Next slide, please. The area where we have significant concerns and would like to flag them for your attention, councillors, is in emissions and mitigation, where the climate change master plan requires the application of a climate lens to asset management. So in looking whether there is traction, we've drilled down, and the asset management template makes no mention of greenhouse gases or fossil fuel, no mention of any calculation, no mention of any data requirements. So if we want to connect the carbon budgets with the financial budgets, what's the best way? Well, the simplest would be a climate lens in the capital asset management process, which is exactly what our climate master plan that you have voted for has recommended. So we need to fill that gap and take that step. Cafes will certainly keep an eye on the capital budget to make sure there's no new big carbon lock-ins, but that's a bit late. By the time that we see things in the capital budget, a lot of design development planning has gone into things. So it's a lot smarter if we can put a carbon lens into our capital asset management framework. So we would recommend that you can please direct staff.
You're over your time.
Okay, so please direct staff to insert such a tool and requirements into our capital asset management framework. Thank you very much.
So we have two people that would like to ask you a question. Councillor Kavanagh.
No, thank you. I'm sorry. That was for the other. That was for the presentation. Sorry, Angela. So while I'm up, I mean,
you don't have to.
Yes, I had it up and down because of the changes. But perhaps staff can answer her questions in terms of our strategy.
This is your time to ask the delegations questions or staff.
Yeah, well, I would like to ask staff if they can reflect her concerns about climate change.
And is this Mr. Willis who will speak?
I'll give a short answer and Ms. Nielsen can give you a little bit more. Ms. Keller-Herzog makes good points. And certainly we've talked directly on many ideas, and I think a lot of our ideas are things we are striving towards. We have strict deadlines to meet the requirements of OREG 588-17, and that's what this plan has been designed to meet, those very, very strict timelines for the asset management plans that we're required to have. These are not mutually exclusive. We can be integrating more as we go, but maybe Jen can add to what I've talked about.
Thank you, Chair. So we've been working very closely with the climate change team, and it's a two-way exchange where we're providing input in terms of the infrastructure to the climate change team, and the climate change team has been involved in our processes in terms of developing the policy and the framework. To Ms. Keller-Herzog's point about them not being on table 2.1, they are within the Economic Development Services service, and we can definitely call them out as part of the branch to be more specific. What we've tried to do with the asset management plan framework is to make linkages to other documents. We don't want to repeat a lot of information, recognizing that these documents are all going to evolve over time, as are our asset management plans. So this first round of asset management plan is really a foundation. It's the first document, but they will evolve and develop over time. So I fully expect that on future iterations, we'll get more and more into detail, we'll improve our methodology, and we want to be able to leave those linkages broad so that as the climate change group refines their approaches, as the maintenance quality standards teams improve their approaches, that we don't have to redo our whole document, that we can continue to connect and follow along. We have baked the climate change pieces directly into the risk and the level of service aspects of our asset management plan framework, and it's called out specifically in those sections, so that it's an aid memoir for staff as they're preparing those documents to make sure that they're applying those lenses, because they are important, they're integral, and we wanted it all baked in right from day one and people thinking about it as a baseline expectation as part of our infrastructure planning.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh, anything else?
Yeah. No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Menard, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, Angela. I'm wondering, you seem to have some expertise on this around other tools that have been used in other cities with regard to this type of asset management and the climate lens. Can you describe better what those would be that Ottawa could be applying here? And then after that, I'll just have a quick question for staff, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Menard, for the question. The tools already exist, so it's not like Ottawa has to invent a climate lens. And at the level of capital asset management, we really should be talking about very specific tools, not just general framework in the clouds words. The Infrastructure Bank of Canada, actually it's probably 2-3 years ago, that they started developing these tools with very specific metrics, and then also scaling for larger and smaller projects, because some of their stuff obviously is very huge. And I think that they have now had a chance to do a couple of generations of that work and refinements, and work is also ongoing at the FCM to be making those tools available to both larger cities and smaller cities, so that it can be integrated with our capital asset management processes. But again, it's in the weeds, it's specific, and we need specific tooling. And I don't think it's good enough just to say that, well, down the road, because I think we're already 2-3 years down the road of having a very good capital asset management system and having this requirement in the climate master plan. So if not now, then when? That would be my answers. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. And I just had some questions to staff, because I understand that we applying climate lens to asset management is a priority for us. Our climate change master plan has this in it. We've obviously had these discussions at City Council as well. I know the climate change group has been working with the asset management branch to discuss this as well. And so I guess I just wonder, for the asset management policies and plans which are being put in place right now for 4 of these 4 AMPs, why aren't we seeing that that applied in this case? I think it is a provincial requirement as well that we look at climate adaptation and mitigation specifically in these plans. So I just wonder, when we will have that, and why we're not seeing it on these first ones that I understand are of an issue with time at this point. But
okay, Mr. Mayor. So we are applying it and we are including it. So this particular report doesn't include the first 4 asset management plans themselves. This is just the framework. So it sort of sets the stage. And we want to continue to be pointing to those other documents that would be the key or primary source of methodology. So we want to be allowing the climate change team to be providing that guidance. And if we put too much detail into the framework, then if and as changes get made and as things evolve, both for us and for that climate change team, it's going to be difficult because we're going to have to go back and rework documents and which one is the master and which one governs over which. So I think we tried to keep it as clear as possible that the climate change guidance would come from that climate change team, and the framework itself, the overarching framework, will guide us.
okay, maybe we'll follow up over email as well, just to ensure that we're all on the same page of how the process is going to work from here. Certainly, we've had conversations a number of times at council or at committee around this as well. So appreciate that. Thank you very much for the update, staff.
Okay, thank you very much, Angela. On the report as presented, carried, adopted.
Carried.
Okay, over to Councillor Luloff on item 1.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. I'm not sure if Mr. Morgan's with us right now, but perhaps Mr. Manconi can respond to some of these questions. During the presentation, Mr. Morgan repeatedly referred to widening the 174. I'm just wondering why we continue to use this term when no additional lanes are being added, and I find that it's misleading. So I respectfully ask once again that we use alternate language like lane relocation. I didn't see any shots of the work happening at Trim Station, although I am aware that there has been quite a bit of work done in this area. I'm wondering how the progress is going and how the progress on removing what we call the abomination or Mont Saint-Joseph d'Orléans at Trim Station. When we last met with KEV, we were told that they were mobilizing immediately to remove it. So I'm wondering if someone at OC Transpo can give my residents an update on this, please.
Is Mr. Manconi going to answer? Mr. Kanalakis? You're on mute. Steve, you're on mute.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I think they might have dropped off the call. I can try to get John and Michael back. I think they thought the item was done and they didn't have any other agenda items, so they left the meeting when it came back.
Why don't you try to get them and we can.
I was just talking to John just now, so I'll call him back. I assumed he was still on the call.
I know Councillor El Shantiri has a motion on this item, so maybe the time you read that, John can get back on. Councillor Shantiri.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I hope Mr. O'Connor is still with us, and I think he is with us. First question, Mr. O'Connor, we used to have a committee of council member committee, and I think we don't have it anymore. I chaired it for 2 terms, but we never had a meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. I believe the member is referring to the Member Services Committee.
So we no longer have the Member Service Committee. Is that it?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so Mr. Mayor, we heard from our colleague and majority of them, they were so disappointing to hear. And disappointment is really a polite term to use in this matter of the leak and how much that's going to cost the taxpayer and dollars. So, Mr. Mayor, I would like to move a motion, and I'd like to read it if you give me a few minutes. I know it's a little bit long, but bear with me. Whereas the code of conduct for member of council, the code complements the existing legislation governing the conduct of member of council, including, oh, here it is, governing to conduct the members of council, including the Municipal Act 2001 and the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And whereas in accordance with the Section 5 of the code, being confidential information, member of council shall not use information that is obtained in his or her capacity as a member and that is not available to the general public to the further or seek to further the member's private interests, or I have to interest, or importantly, to further or seek the further another person's private interest. And whereas the code further provides that in accordance with the rules under Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, MFPA, and the procedural bylaw, member of council shall not, whereas a matter has been discussed in camera, and whereas the matter remain confidential, disclose the content of the matter or the substance of the deliberation of the in-camera meeting, subsection 42(1)(d) of the procedural bylaw, nor disclose or release by any means or any member of the public any confidential information acquired by virtue of their office in their oral or written form, except when required by law or authorized by council to do so. And whereas a confidential memo titled Stage 1 Insurance Claim Confidential was sent from city staff and external legal counsel to member of council on May 10, 2021, and was subsequently obtained by the media. If you can scroll down, please. Okay. Therefore, be it resolved that pursuant to Section 5, confidential information of the Code of Conduct for member of council, the Finance and Economic Development Committee recommends City Council direct the Integrity Commissioner to undertake an investigation into the release of the above noted confidential memo and provide a report on this finding as soon as possible. And Mr. Mayor, if I can just request and add to this, I think whether a city councilor or whether a senior city staffer, perhaps suggestion should reach out to the Integrity Commissioner directly and seek their advice. This is a very important issue, and I'm hoping the Integrity Commission will use anything available in his power to get to the bottom of this, including using a police service if he has to. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so thank you, Councillor. We'll hold that. Mr. Morgan is on the line. Councillor Luloff, please.
Thank you very much, and apologies to my colleagues for going through this again. I think it's important that Mr. Morgan has the context of my question. During the presentation, Mr. Morgan, you repeatedly referred to widening the 174. I'm wondering why we continue to use this term when no additional lanes are actually being added to the 174. I find that terminology misleading, and I respectfully ask once again that we use alternate language like lane relocation. I didn't see any shots of the work at Trim Station, so I'm wondering how the progress is going there. And how the progress is going on removing what we call in the East End the abomination, or Mont Saint-Joseph d'Orléans at Trim Station. When we last met with KEV, we were told that they were mobilizing immediately to remove it, and that's what we reported back to our residents after asking if it was okay to do so. I'm wondering if you could take this opportunity to give my residents and Councillor Kitz's residents an update on this, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are two comments there. The widening, yes, we have been using that term a fair amount, widening to make space for the stations. Obviously, if it's a realignment or other language you prefer us to use, but you're right, we're not adding a lane, just moving the lanes over to make space for the stations in the center center of the highway. And so there is a bunch of work happening. So we've been able to do that at Jeanne d'Arc and at Place. We've made space for the stations. The next big area we need to do is we need to relocate the Trim Road and OR 174 intersection to make space for the station, and then the station will start. So it's going to be one of the last ones to begin, but that's okay because it's not an elevated station. I guess the other work that's happening at Trim in terms of the berm, so there was a temporary stockpile that was overbuilt at that location. There was a commitment early on, several weeks ago, as you rightly say, that to act on that right away and to reduce the height. Subsequent to that, the CAV has re-looked at their schedule and has assessed that they need to defer some of that work until the end of the summer. So now we're looking, in terms of end of August timeline to start that work, where you will see the massive reduction. But again, we're going to follow up on that closely with them and just assess and make sure that they can achieve that. They've had some challenges with vehicles and additional trucks, and they didn't want to divert those from the primary project activity.
I'm sure you can understand how disappointing that will be to our residents. So I would just encourage you and your team to continue to place pressure and to encourage CEV to live up to the promises that they've made on this file. As you're well aware, I'm continuing to be inundated with vibration complaints between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. This paving work is happening meters from bedroom windows on Elderberry, Pintail, Sugar Creek, Taffy, and Vineyard especially. What work is CEV doing to remedy these issues? I'm CC'd on every complaint of vibrations for night work. I just counted about 140 emails in my inbox on this. My residents are frustrated that nothing seems to be done when their requests for schedule changes come in. I've called no less than a dozen meetings on this with your team and with CEV, and understanding that pushing the schedule out will cost the city dearly. What more can CEV do to ensure the mental health of my residents is considered moving forward? And why can't this oscillating work be done earlier in the evening?
So a lot of the work that's causing the biggest impact is related to the interchanges where you have off ramps and the homes are very close to those off ramps. And so we have made our way through through a couple of major intersections. Obviously, Jeanne d'Arc was a big one. Place d'Orleans is another one that we've just kind of been able to make a lot of progress on. This type of work, typically when you're closing a ramp, we've restricted that activity to nighttime periods or weekend periods. In recent weeks, following conversations with yourself and your team, we have been more generous in terms of allowing them to do daytime ramp closures. That does have significant impacts, but at the outset of writing the PA document, the idea was that we would try to minimize traffic impacts. Obviously, the whole environment has changed, and so shifting as much work as possible to daytime is obviously desirable for the community, especially for those that live close to the work that's ongoing. The work is progressing. They are making good progress, so that we should be able to wrap up some of that work that's in close proximity. At the same time, at your behest, we've spoken to CEV about accelerating some of the noise walls in the various areas so that work can happen earlier, and so that the follow-on work with the stations and everything else we can do as much as possible to reduce the impacts. So we are trying to shift as much work to daytime as we can. There are some limitations on that. They are very aggressive in terms of their construction schedules, trying to work 24 hours a day in many cases. We'll continue to work with them to give them more flexibility for daytime hours. There's a limit to how much they can do during the daytime when they're working 24 hours, but happy to engage with you further and make sure that we give them as much flexibility to move it away from the nighttime activity as possible. It's not possible in all areas, but in many areas, it's worth a revisit.
I really do appreciate your willingness to work with me on accelerating that timeline for sound walls. I think it's going to make a big difference for my residents as far as the noise impacts are concerned. During your presentation, you said that we've received very little complaints about ramp and lane closures. Personally, I would sacrifice 20 minutes in traffic for 6 hours of sleep, and I don't know anybody who wouldn't. I know how difficult this has been on CEV, and I appreciate these difficulties. I feel for CEV. It just doesn't seem to me that they feel for me. and my residents. So I just want to encourage Kev in public to ensure that they're abiding by the stipulations in the noise bylaw exemption. No tailgate slamming, no yelling, no unnecessary vehicle idling, box shaking. These are the sorts of things that are incredibly disruptive to my residents and things that are absolutely unnecessary to be doing at night. So I appreciate your answers to my question, and we'll continue to work together on this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Luloff. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I can reflect upon what Councillor Luloff has said, because the same thing is happening out here in the West End in terms of noise. It's a major factor. Day doesn't go by without complaints of noise. But I'd like to first of all thank Michael Morgan and his team. They work with us very closely, and I appreciate that. And we've had meetings, and we give all the information to people, which is helpful. But the noise can drive people crazy. And the issue is that we have a lot of condominiums and apartments, so therefore it's not just a few houses, it's multiplied by hundreds who are left being awake at night. And it's been pretty tough when it's over the weekends and overnights, etc. So again, it's an ongoing problem, and all the points that Councillor Luloff just made about the excess, just watching those things like the backing up, dropping tailgates, things like that has been very problematic. We hear every bit of it from our residents. So I want to thank the team for working with Kev on that, and hopefully we can eliminate more. My questions are about connectivity, and I appreciate that you've mentioned some of the things that are happening. The construction is going great. Lots going on here out in Bay Ward. But one of the things that was a disappointment recently was on Moody Bridge was having a MUP put onto it. And Kev overpriced it. And now we're scrambling to replace it. And I just want to confirm that we will make a MUP on the Moody Bridge. So it's a very important connectivity for people to get there. That's the last station. It's very important for Bell's Corner people. It's important for Crystal Bay people. So I just want to confirm that will happen.
Mr. Mayor, we have been looking at doing a variation had been looking at doing a variation to add them up to that particular bridge. The costing came back, and it was not reasonable and the city staff think that there's a better way to do that, a more efficient way. And so we are reviewing that, investigating that now. The current plan is still to add that MUP.
Thank you. That I needed to hear, because it was a concern when Kev priced us out. As well, the connectivity around stations. I heard you in the presentation talk about Mooney's Bay having lighting, and lighting keeps coming up all the time. It's a safety issue. Our issue is that the lands around the stations, such as in the Connaught corridor, are NCC, and we haven't got a commitment yet in terms of any kind of lighting or snow clearing or those pathways that are very, very important to get to those stations. Have you got any further news? Or I've tried to meet with NCC myself, and can we still move forward on this? Because this is important.
Mr. Chair, Councillor, so we are still continuing to advocate for lighting on these additional MUPs where the connections are good. Obviously, some of it's a jurisdiction issue. And we have been working with councillors to add lighting on key connection points where it's fully within our control. And then some of the other areas, it requires additional support from outside parties. And so I can't commit to that on their behalf.
Okay, well, I think it's important that we work closely with our NCC partners. We've obviously had to since we're using the land to get that line through. The other connectivity issue was cut through to Queensview Station. This was something that was not put into the budget originally, but it's still being marked as a very important point for people to get to the Queensview station, especially as there's more growth around Queensview. So I just want to know if there's going to be any progress on that.
Mr. Mayor, we are working with Mr. Willis on a plan to address that particular issue, and it's probably more information to come later in the summer on that. Okay,
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. The other question I have is dismantling of stations that are currently there. We've been asked about the possibility of recycling them and for other uses, perhaps in parks or as features, because they're very solid and they could have another life, so they don't end up in a landfill. Is there any possibility of that?
We haven't considered that to date, but that's something we can take away. Councillor, we can take that offline and review with OC Transpo and with the builder to see if there's any opportunities there.
Thank you. One more question, and that's in relation to the bus depot that's on Queensview. This is not directly related, but it's related. And I know this is a Steve Willis question, but eventually, why would we have a bus depot when we're right beside a station? Can we look at that for affordable housing and other important facilities for the city in the future?
So, Mr. Mayor, maybe I can answer this for Mr. Morgan. I think both this and the Queensview connection, we'll work with the councillor to get some directions to staff that council can approve, and then staff will have the authorities they need to undertake both the acquisitions and the long-term planning for the bus facility. Bus facility is useful in its location right now, but as in discussions with OC Transpo, there could be a possibility to develop a business case in the future for relocating it. But we need to do that work and bring that to council for its approval. So we'll be happy to work with the councillor to get those authorities in place to start the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Mayor. Mr. Morgan, thank you for your presentation. Your knowledge is excellent, and I too appreciate working with you and your team in the South End. The giant Stay Puft marshmallow that's wrapped around the Rideau River Bridge. Can you talk about the intent? Is that to mitigate matter from falling into the river? Like, do we have a good process in place to protect the water quality from debris falling into the river? Can you just explain what the purpose of that white wrap is?
Mr. Mayor, so the white wrap around the Rideau River Bridge is essentially a fully contained bubble. I think that's probably the right word. There is actually a door within that larger structure. There is a door partway through that you can actually enter into that facility, and people going to that facility, there's a series of safety precautions, including ventilators and other things that are required to actually work in that space. But the idea is absolutely it captures, so they're sandblasting the existing structure to take off the rust and other materials and clean it up. And that container is meant to capture everything that comes off of that structure, including the sandblasting, the sand from the sandblasting process, to make sure it's protected and nothing escapes that facility.
Okay, there's not only are we repairing this bridge, we're building a brand new one. So there have been some questions about how we're preserving the water quality. So I appreciate that. And my only other question is regarding the Walkley MUP. You mentioned in your presentation the MUP that exists now parallel to the new station is closed, completely understood with all the construction vehicles. What is the timeline to extend this MUP further south and then ultimately over to Bank Street? There's a lot of issues at play with the station being built. Your video showed 2 new towers that are being built right beside it. It goes through a RioCan property, which is built. Are you able to confirm that at this time?
I don't have a recent update on that particular multi-use pathway and that connection. I know that because planning is deeply involved with that one because of all the development in the area, and so we'd have to take that offline and get you that information on timing and who's doing it.
Are we at least scheduling to open it concurrent with the station opening?
Councillor, I would need to check with planning
Okay.
on the timing.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Menard, please.
Thanks very much, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up at one of our last public meetings. We had been discussing the O train, and the mayor was discussing the schedule. And one of the suggestions that had come up around that was a segment of the O train around Carleton that could potentially be brought online a bit earlier, or when it was supposed to finish, for example, and the rest of it to finish later. And I'm just wondering if staff have any update on the question the mayor had asked, which was, is that a possibility to kind of open that one piece early and have that piece operating before maybe the rest of it is finished? Is there an update from staff on that, the mayor's question?
Happy to provide an update on that question. So we have been looking at that as an opportunity to essentially to consider, could you open airport to South Keys and South Keys to Bayview? You know, as the schedule's shifting and different things come on and off the critical path. Right now, there's a couple of issues on the critical path in the northern section, so that make that a challenge to do. So based on the schedule we have in front of us today, a partial opening is likely impossible. But that's not to say that things won't shift over this construction season. If we make good progress in some areas, then that may present itself as an opportunity again at some point later in the year.
Okay, thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Anything else on item 1? So on Councillor El Shantiri's motion, as presented, to ask the Integrity Commissioner to follow up. Carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Okay, thank you. Next is Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development, Service de planification de l'infrastructure de développement économique. Economic development, excuse me, and long-range planning, développement économique et planification à long terme. Number 6, Montreal Road Community Improvement Plan application from Merck Holdings for 458 Montreal Road. So we have a presentation, and then I believe a number of people who'd like to speak. So who is doing the presentation? Is this Mr. Herwire? Welcome, Mr. Herwire. I think you're on mute. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll just wait for the presentation to come up. There we go. Yes, as you mentioned, this is an application for 458 Montreal Road for as part of the Montreal Road Community Improvement Plan. Next slide. So just a brief refresher on community improvement plans. As you know, CIPs are tools available for Ontario municipalities to enable the provision of financial incentives directly to property owners to encourage those property owners to upgrade and improve their economic, the vitality of the designated area. So as you know, financial incentives are not otherwise permitted under the Municipal Act. It's considered bonusing. So CIPs are one of the prime tools that the city has in order to encourage that type of redevelopment in specified areas across the city. And we have a number of them in the city of Ottawa. I thought I'd just share a few recent success stories in terms of from the other CIPs. This is the first project for the Montreal Road CIP. So I'll just touch on a couple of recent projects in Bell's Corners, which is another one of our CIP areas. And what we found there was that we had a couple of quite successful projects. There was a large brand Hyatt Hotel and a retail project, a 3-unit retail project that recently were approved there. So that's had a very positive impact on the Bell's Corners community and the overall economic activity there. And we're really hopeful that this particular project will have a similar impact for Vanier. And I can have Mr. Chris Cope provide some further details at the end of the presentation in terms of those other projects in those corners, and another one on St. Joseph Boulevard if the committee's interested in that level of detail. Next slide, please. So again, the Montreal Road CIP was adopted by Council in June of 2019. And really the intent there is to encourage investment and property upgrades along that Montreal Road corridor as part of the Vision Vanier. So through the CIP, the city can provide those financial incentives to property owners to encourage that urban renewal, and also to promote, development of cultural assets, support the business community, and which includes not-for-profit and cultural organizations, and just generally encourage investment and expansion, contribute to the renewal of an area. So as I mentioned, the program is a tax increment based, so it's financed solely through the cumulative increase in property taxes. The owners can receive incentives up to 75% of that tax increase, and that is paid over a 10-year period. So the financial incentive amounts are based on the actual uplift in property taxes that follow the completion of a project. And there's a formal reassessment by MPAC that's part of that. So that is known as a tax increment equivalent grant. And again, that's not paid out in advance. It's directly tied to the amount of development that's completed on the property, and then the corresponding increase in property tax contribution to the city. So if the development doesn't proceed, there's no grant paid. Next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, this is the first application for the Montreal Road CIP program. It's the kind of investment we're hoping to see more of along Montreal Road. One that creates jobs, encourages more commercial development and revitalization. So just a note, the CIP criteria approved by Council does not permit the city to restrict projects because of the brand of the proponent. So again, we're anticipating this will supplement the renewal that we're anticipating for this portion of Montreal Road. The proposed dealership is larger than the two dealership buildings that are on site, and will lead to an increase in jobs from approximately 35 to almost doubling in the order of 55 jobs. So it will involve the demolition of the existing structure that's close to the Montreal Saint Laurent intersection, and it will be replaced with a $17 million two-story automobile dealership building. So again, the construction will generate employment, including the various construction and engineering jobs that go with it over a 2-year period. And again, this is a site that's the eastern gateway of Quarter Vanier, that larger shopping district. And we're hopeful that the development will showcase that upgraded streetscape along Montreal Road. So the project will produce additional tax revenue for the city. Over a 10-year lifespan of the project, the city will receive approximately $3.9 million in property taxes. The project can receive up to $2.9 million back. So over that 10-year period, the city is still approximately $1 million over or ahead of the game over those 10 years. And again, just to reiterate, the incentive is based on the actual tax increase. So, and I'm sure we'll hear from the owner on this, the CIP incentive was a significant inducement for Mirac Holdings to do this project at this location. So they did focus on the Montreal Road location. They had opportunity to locate elsewhere. So this really means that the CIP is working and effective in encouraging that needed development along the corridor. And our last slide will just drill down a little bit into those numbers. Next slide, please. So here's the numbers I was speaking to. So the red bars on the graph show the increased property taxes on an annual basis, and those are attributed to the property redevelopment. The green bars show the annual incentives. There's about 82,000 left over in In terms of the first year, and as I mentioned earlier, nearly $1 million net to the city over the 10-year period. And then after, of course, the 10-year period, that ramps up significantly. And the blue bars show the pre-development or current property tax values. So in conclusion, the staff are very pleased to recommend approval of this first project within the Montreal Road CIP, which will support a long-time local business, create additional jobs, and we trust stimulate further business investment and renewal in the area. Project will also create visual interest and a much improved streetscape at this gateway corner in the Montreal Road CIP area. I'd be pleased to take any questions. And as I mentioned, Chris Cope, who leads our CIP program, is also present to assist. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll go to delegations first and then people to ask questions. Yeah, Councillor Ubley, do you have a question to staff? So we're going to hear the delegates first.
Yeah, it's just a quick question for clarification to staff, but if you want to go to delegates, I'll just put my hand back up after.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we have a number of people who like to speak to this. First is Christine McQuaig, speaking on behalf of the owners of the property. Ms. McQuaig, if you'd like to speak, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the committee. My name is Christine McQuaig. I am the planning consultant working with Mark Motors of Ottawa, Marac Holdings. So as it was mentioned, the Montreal Road Community Improvement Plan, it's designed as an incentive towards renewal and redevelopment along certain areas of the city, in this area, particularly Montreal Road, to enhance the streetscape, provide jobs or other important community components. As mentioned, Mark Motors of Ottawa is a family-owned and run company that's been in Ottawa, and particularly in Vanier, for over 60 years. They've been community leaders and have given back in numerous ways. Like other developers of land, they have more than one site in the city in which they could have developed, and they did cost-benefit analysis for these various sites. One of those was on West Hunt Club. During the review of this cost-benefit analysis, we obviously came into contact with the Montreal Community Improvement Plan details and had a number of meetings very early on with Chris Cope to discuss the details of the Community Improvement Plan program. It was because of these early meetings and the details of the Montreal Road Community Improvement Plan and Mark Motors of Ottawa determined that they could develop the Montreal Road site and do something special at this location. And to that point, through the redevelopment of the site, Mark Motors is able to provide more jobs in this area, improve the streetscape with a full cycle track, a public art component, a gateway with bench seating, continuous animated retail frontage with the reduction in the number of vehicle accesses that currently exist on Montreal Road at this location. And it's also noted that Mark Motors of Ottawa has held community fundraising events at their stores in the past, and they do expect to continue to do this in the future. Just as a point of information, our site plan control application was submitted after, like I said, numerous meetings with Chris Cope, and we're currently about 3/4 of the way through that process now. The Community Improvement Plan program, as mentioned, it's tax increment money that is being incurred as a result of the redevelopment itself, and therefore the City of Ottawa is still receiving, as mentioned, about $1 million over that 10-year period, over what would be received if the property had not been redeveloped. And just as a final point, from the planning side of things, community improvement plans are such an excellent planning tool as a way to encourage redevelopment and renewal in areas of the city that just need that extra boost. They do all work a little bit differently. In this case, the incentive is that tax grant, where the increase in the taxes from redevelopment funds the grant itself. It's quite a clever way of stimulating change, and it's our hope that this project will encourage more landowners along Montreal Road to consider taking part in this program. So I just want to say a special thanks to the city for guiding us through the process in the early stages of our cost-benefit analysis and sort of allowing us to do something special at this location. And I'd like to turn it over to one of the owners, Michael Marac, who can say a few words as well. Thank you.
We'll just deal with one at a time because there's a question for you, Christine, I believe, from Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Christine, for your presentation. Christine, did you mention Mark Morer owns property on Hunt Club Road, West Hunt Club Road.
That is correct.
So you mean and it's also properly zoned, and they can have that building on West Hunt Club if they choose not to be on Montreal Road.
That is correct.
So they do have that option. Okay, I just want to clarify. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Also to Christine, Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Christine, you mentioned you're going through a site plan approval process for this. Does that mean, is there also any zoning bylaw amendment required?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is no zoning bylaw amendment required. We are seeking a committee of adjustment, minor variance application, simply to adjust the front yard setback.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question for Christine? Okay, so next on my list is Lisa Mark of Mark Motors.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the council. I think, I'll start off just really quickly summarizing a lot of what Christine has said, and some of you may know the family. Some of you may not know the family. However, I will emphasize that we've been in the family business for the last 62 years. We're one of the first Porsche dealers in the country. And we've been given an opportunity for a few different reasons, which I know my brother Mike will sort of round out as far as the details on it, to be one of the very few Porsche dealers to be able to put up what they call a destination center. Our philosophy as a family has always been, we grew up this through our parents, that we have to be good neighbors, and to be good neighbors we have to give back to the community, make sure it's healthy, and then also take care of our staff. If we do that, then everything will come back around, and we'll have a great city to live in. So that's essentially the philosophy that we've applied throughout our entire lives, as well as with our parents. As a result of that, Christine did mention our community spirit. We've spent a lot of time with the Boys and Girls Club, not only up the road in the Vanier area, but also across the city. We have relationships and support the Ottawa Hospital, the Royal Ottawa Hospital, the Humane Society, the National Art Center. I can go on, but these are all very true organizations that are very close to our hearts. And we believe that we will continue, and I know we will continue to support them, again, to help sort of balance out the business aspect. The employment side is obviously really important. We need our employees to be taken care of, and we do so with the buildings that we build. So we always build state of the art. We never go short in the areas that our employees will work in, whether it's providing air conditioning in the shop areas, whether it's making sure that they have the best conditions to work under to make them efficient and successful, as well as to grow our buildings so that we can allow for more employment in the city. Again, we all win when we do those types of things. I think that's really all I want to say at this point in time. Like I said, most of you may know us, but I think it's only really to emphasize the value of the CIP and how important it is to our family to be in this particular gateway and to use this as an opportunity to sort of lay down our heritage as a family to the gateway to the Vanier Quartier, which is the east side of the city of Ottawa, and which is essentially where we started. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Lisa? Councillor El-Shantiri?
Just a quick question for Lisa. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Lisa, for your presentation. You and Christine. Do we have any idea how many employees you'll be hiring with the new building? How many staffing?
Yeah, we currently have about, I think we currently have about 40 employees in that particular store. We will grow it at least 50% once the new store is open, given the extra space that we'll have. But to be honest, we'll also be able to grow it even further as a region, simply because of the offshoots that come from that, whether it's the gas station up the road, so we'll be able to sort of fill in with more staff and growth through the different organizations and suppliers that we already currently work with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. And our next presenter is Michael Mark from Mark Motors.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for taking the time to listen to us, all councillors. To reiterate, the CIP and just really the logic we came to and the rationale we came to developing the store and what we wanted to do. Ultimately, we do have the opportunity, like Christine was saying earlier, to build a store elsewhere in the city that's property zoned, and we could have easily done that and saved ourselves a lot of money. But the store we're building here in the corner of Montreal Road and Montreal Boulevard came to mind primarily because of a few things. There's the fact that we grew up in the area. We support the area. In fact, our family grew up only 3 blocks from that side of Mutual Street in Vanier. When we grew up, it was called Eastview, and Eastview changed a lot through Vanier, and the other area has not really improved as much as perhaps it could have, is what we see it. We always have our roots in the East End. My father started his business on the corner of Montreal Road and Montreal Boulevard when it was called Forbes Corners back in 1958. And we never forgot that. We've always been giving back. Maybe we're a little bit sentimental. We're also very superstitious, but we felt it was the right thing to do. But then the dollars and cents come into play. We look at the site in the West End. We look at the site in the East End. We get Porsche involved as well because they have to have some input in this. And the input itself comes from Germany, not just from us. They have their CI components we have to meet. And, we put all the numbers together, and the East End wasn't cutting it. It was only when we were talking to Chris Cove at one point, we started crunching some numbers, and the CIP plan itself made a lot of sense for us. And in fact, it was the one thing that made us say, okay, you know what, it's kind of paying itself off. We can justify it financially this way. And thank God it did, because we had to make a decision a couple of years ago as to what we want to do. And less than 2 years ago, and we decided on this very corner for all the right reasons, financially speaking, and the CIP had everything to do with it, but also because we have sentimental value as well. So it kind of made it easier at that point to spend a bit more money, but knowing that we're getting the CIP as part of that. Ultimately, there's any project that we build, as Lisa was saying, is state of the art, but when it comes to Porsche, we build a number of luxury stores here in the city. Porsche is a whole new world. They elevate it to the next level. And I'll just take our CI compliant guide. It's basically a book that is ridiculously thick, that we have to meet the criteria for Porsche. It's not, and it's all because Porsche doesn't just want to build a dealership with a parking lot and cars parked out. They want to build a place that people can go into, whether they're just curious, not if they can afford the car or not, primarily to show interest in the product, a place that can be excited to go into and talk about, a place they can enjoy and talk to their friends and their parents about it, a place that people can remember. And we've got kids right now, I can honestly tell you that we've got kids that my father was looking after when he was here in the store on Sundays, handing posters out to kids when they would walk in, putting their nose up against the window. And they're buying cars, but it made these kids' day, the fact that they can actually walk in and just see this car. And I won't say it's a museum, but we like to think it is, but it's a place that we keep people happy and we move on, and we're all happy that way. From our point of view, from our family's point of view, it never, the nicest thing you'll see is if you see people that are walking in, young and old, that are just happy to be able to see something that's beautiful. And that's where we're at. And so ultimately we made the decision. I think the CIP is very important in our decision, but I think it's also very important for the Vanier community to have this available to them. And we're the early adopter to this. We've created the gateway to the city with the CIP. We've also made it so the bike lane and the bike track is available for the cyclists and so on and so forth, me being one of them. But I think it's a win-win situation for everybody. I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I have a question from Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation today, Mr. Mark, as well. My question is, as Councillor Al-Shantari pointed out in his question to Lisa, I believe, so there's a net 20 new jobs involved here to the site. Can you just tell us what those jobs are, like examples?
Well, basically, the primary jobs, there's technicians themselves. We are currently over capacity in our existing store. We're going to be going to 14 work bays, and we currently have 7. So it's doubling the size. We've got technicians themselves that we train in-house here, as well as train when they go to the United States or Toronto or Germany in some cases. And these technicians, I need to add that they're not your typical oil changers. I'm not knocking oil changers or people that do that sort of work, but these are technicians that take a car, an electric vehicle that we are selling, and Porsche has early adopted that as well. It has been for many years, and they program vehicles, and they take a car that can show data that you've driven on that car and put into a system that shows us exactly where a car may have failed at one point. There's technicians here that are making 6 digits, to give an idea. And I think it's very, very good from a tax base, what they're giving back to the community from what they spend it on. But it's also adds to the actual overall what we need to support this staff. In other words, a technician like that, for every 3 technicians, you need to have 2 more support staff, whether it be in parts or on the service front end or in sales. So that's why it'll be at least 20 jobs. There's actually more people that we are going to need at this point in time, because when we're actually over capacity right now, we don't even know how much more we're going to need, but we know we need 20 for sure. If you look at the Porsche plan for our store, we go by a 2025 plan and a 2030 plan for all the Porsche stores across Canada. And the 2025 plan right now, this store will suffice. But it doesn't mean it won't be outgrown perhaps in 2-3 years. Maybe it'll be sooner than that. Maybe a bit later than that. But Porsche for the last 15 to 20 years, I can recall, has always been spot on with their numbers.
Anything else, Councillor Hughley?
No, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right.
You're on mute, Mr. Mayor. You're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Our next member of the public is Sam Hirsch from the Chinese Canadian Coalition or Collective.
The allure of that.
Oh, sorry, can folks hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, I'm speaking on behalf of myself first, and then because I can't speak on behalf of the Chinese Canadian Collective anymore, I spoke to the council, the committee coordinators, that I couldn't do that anymore, so I could just speak to myself, and then I can't speak to that later on if that's okay.
Yeah, just once, so go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, hello, bonjour, je m'appelle Sam Hirsch, je suis ici aujourd'hui sur les territoires non cédés du peuple algonquin.
I'm here today on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people, and I'm here to speak on their behalf and on the behalf of several residents in Ottawa.
First, I want to briefly say that I don't think it was right to have the almost 3-hour in-camera meeting before this item when several delegates are taking time out of their day to speak to this item, who probably have now dropped off this call, like I will have to, and can't speak on behalf of another group. The in-camera item should have been kept as the last item on the agenda in respect of those who came to speak today. It's common sense. I hope councillors and committee members take this into account in the future. There's absolutely no reason that this in-camera item could have been done as the last item. These sorts of procedural moves that can be taken as attempts to hinder civic engagement are what make people cynical. So I'm here today to speak up about community and accountability to residents in regards to item 6 on this agenda, the CIP and Mark Holdings planning application. And there's been a lot of conversation around this item in the media when the story broke out just a couple of days ago from CBC reporter Kate Porter. And I want to first thank Kate Porter for breaking the story, because if she hadn't, it probably would have just flown under everyone's radar, and this would have been an easy job for this committee today. But luckily, here we are, even though that in-camera meeting lasted very long. There may have been conversations over what this application actually does. Some have argued that it's a direct giveaway of funds. Some have said that it's money that will come back to us at the end of the day. And some have disagreed with the premise that this is the city giving away any public money at all. But the fact of the matter is that this is exactly what it looks like, no matter how you spin it. If approved today, this is our city councilors publicly subsidizing a private holding company who just spoke at this meeting, Mark Holdings, who just spoke before me, to build a Porsche dealership in a neighborhood that, quite frankly, doesn't need one. Oh, and let me add, there's another Porsche dealership literally down the street from 45 Montreal Road on 611 Montreal Road. Even one is too many, quite frankly. This is quite clearly corporate welfare and nothing else. Quite frankly, I think that the Mark family will be well off without the city waiving property taxes. And if he isn't, well, maybe he shouldn't be in the business of selling Porsches and let small businesses who are actually struggling take some of these public funds. These $3 million is part of a community improvement program grant that is apparently meant to go to projects to improve job prospects in the area, as well as improving pedestrian friendliness, accessibility, stimulating cultural assets, as staff were saying, assisting social enterprise, and stimulating the development of affordable housing. Many members of the public throughout the past couple of days have said that this initiative does not do that. And reading the staff report, I was quite frankly shocked that staff would even suggest that a car dealership, let alone a luxury car dealership, would even do that. Over 400 residents, let me say 400 residents of the city of Ottawa in less than 24 hours have signed on to Rise in Ottawa's campaign to demand that councillors reject the proposal and recommendation to give Mark Motors this grant and waive their property taxes over the next 10 years. We don't need to incentivize them to build here. What we need to do is incentivize investments in public infrastructure and social services, which would generate just as much, if not more, jobs, and the character of that economic activity would be far more equitable than enabling one family to sell more luxury cars to rich people in a low-income neighborhood. And listening to the last presentation to say that this money and going into this would benefit other businesses, I don't think is true. This is a community grant that should have been included the community. But it makes sense that some of you have not stood with the community because they are not your priority. For some of you, we know that your priority is not the community, but the wealthy, well-connected corporate developer and landlord class.
1 minute.
And we know that because of your actions. Thank you. Like you, Mayor Watson, who has accepted a collective over $2,500 in campaign donations from the Mark family since 2010. We know from previous interviews that this matters very little to you, Mayor Watson, but it matters to a lot of people in the city of Ottawa who want a fairer politics in this city and a politics that reflects residents across this city, not just the wealthy. I know at the end of my delegation, councillors might say that this is not public money to give away, but money that is supposed to be taxed but then is untaxed is money that is lost, that could have been used, and we need to start talking about untaxed money that way. So FEDCO members, if you reject the premise that I just made, that most of you prioritize the wealthy and well-connected and developer class in our city, and you stand with residents, prove me wrong and stand with over 400 Ottawa residents and vote against this planning application today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hirsch, any questions? Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Okay, thank you. Next is Sarp Kazir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can't see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm not going to use my video because I have to read off my phone. Is that okay?
You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. When I think our community needs better social infrastructure, I don't think let's build a Porsche dealership to make that happen. No one that lives around Saint Laurent Boulevard and Searville Road is saying that the reason they love living in that area is because they live near a BMW and Mercedes dealership. These are places that don't add any practicality and usefulness to the day-to-day lives of the majority of people who live in those areas. The same will happen on the corner of Montreal Road and Saint Laurent. I've seen my fair share of flagship Porsche dealerships in Montreal and Toronto. They're generic, unremarkable buildings. They're not the most welcoming and inviting places either. They don't excite a large part of the population in Vanier because a large part of the population in Vanier, A, is completely tired of the idea of another dealership taking over on that corner, and B, can't afford a Porsche. This is not the type of community development we need at this time. We don't need a flagship Porsche dealership right in the middle of our beloved neighborhood to remind us that the average person will never matter to the people who run this city. There's no financial logic within this grant that provides any locked-in guarantee that any of the returns will directly benefit the people who need it the most by the time the money gets washed in the bureaucracy. Property taxes have never not gone up, yet we still have people living in tents on our streets because of a 10-year waiting list for affordable housing. Our roads and schools are still in shambles. Food banks are hitting shortages regularly now, and bike infrastructure is basic and dangerous at best. We have to fight over crumbs on the table to even get funding to throw community barbecues nowadays. And now you're telling me that approving the expansion of a Porsche dealership is going to symbolize some sort of crowning achievement when we don't even have our fundamentals covered. Oh, and we're being told that this grant is available to all businesses, but I'm curious as to why it wasn't advertised more openly. and why a lot of struggling businesses in the area automatically feel unable to apply when they read the fine print. I'm seeing key players saying things like all businesses can apply, but they're also saying that only property owners can apply. Not every business owner is a property owner. Also, why would you put a Porsche dealership in Vanier? Why does that even need explaining? It's not even the last thing we need. It's something that we don't need at all. Please, if you have to, and for the sake of businesses who won't be able to get CIP support, build your dealership with your own money. In closing, stop turning Montreal Road into the personal vision of one man who's deciding which business lives and which business dies. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kazir. Any questions? Next, le prochain, Philippe Deneau. Mr. Deneau, Monsieur Deneau.
Monsieur Deneau, Philippe Deneau. Bonjour.
Just set my timer. Forgot about that. Okay. So good afternoon. Sorry. Thank you for the opportunity, despite the very short notice. I would like to express my objection as a private citizen to this application for 458 Montreal Road. In general, I believe the grant will not improve the community. It will improve the business of a particular. In my view, this is equivalent to providing social assistance to a millionaire. First of all, there is no analysis in the city staff report of whether this project would go on but for public funding. This is a serious lapse in the report. Secondly, there is a disconnect between the location of the proposed project and the traditional main street of Vanier. The idea that the new, I quote, the new facility will represent an important gateway to the Cartier-Vanier shopping district and showcase the city's newly upgraded streetscape, unquote, is detached from the reality. Although located in Cartier-Vanier, okay, this location is surrounded by, on the east side, the shopping malls on Montreal Road and Saint Laurent, which is not in Cartier-Vanier, the cemetery on the north side, and a very extended convent, religious convent on the east side. So there is a clear disconnect with the main street portion of Vanier. It will not represent Cartier-Vanier, where individual stores are located for individual residents. Contrary to what is stated by city staff, the glass facade of this new facility will not create a visual interest and animation in support of the area's traditional main street designation. It is only spinning, sugar coating, an application that will have no impact on our main street in Vanier. Thirdly, there is a disconnect with the Salvation Army shelter on Montreal Road. The city of Ottawa approved the shelter in 2017. To build a luxury sport car dealership at a distance of 750 meters from a homeless shelter is, in my view, indication that the city of Ottawa does not approach the development of Montreal Road Cartier-Vanier in a coherent manner. No need to say that to expose homeless people to such a commerce is morally indefensible. A luxury sport car dealership will not address the council priority regarding thriving communities that promote safety, culture, social and physical well-being. Fourthly, the overall vision of the CIP and special character of our main street will not be supported by this project. The CIP is substantively oriented towards the special character of Montreal Road as the main street of Vanier. It states that the overall affordability of space in the area has attracted artists, artistic and cultural organizations, social enterprise, not-for-profits, etc. Furthermore, active users shall promote an active pedestrian environment on the ground floor and may include shops, small businesses, markets, cafes, art workshops, etc. According to the CIP, new business investment should support the life and work of artists and activities of art and heritage organizations, all of which are important for the health and livability of Montreal Road. In other words, this project must be integrated to the social and economic environment and community fabric of Cartier-Vanier. It must meet the general goals of the CIP. These goals are not to make money. The intent was not to promote the development of this type of luxury commerce deserving a clientele from outside the neighborhood. In a nutshell, this grant will not bring anything to the development of Quartier Vanier or Vanier in itself.
1 minute.
Yeah. Fifthly, the spirit of Section 28 of the Planning Act is not respected. Section 28 defines a community improvement area as an area within a municipality, the community improvement of which, in the opinion of the council, is desirable because of age, dilapidation, overcrowding, faulty arrangement, unsuitability of buildings. This is not what we're talking about here. Bylaw, the CIP bylaw is subordinated to that framework. In other words, this project does not match or barely matches the legislative framework in which the CIP was developed and approved. And finally, in 2017, in the context of the SA application for a shelter, a city council motion directed staff to work within a BBRN framework to improve collaboration with respect to CIP. It is, in my view, completely unacceptable in this context that the project was not consulted with the community beyond pre-consultation with city staff. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? No, thank you.
Are there any questions?
Welcome, Ms. Shantz. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Laura Shantz. Mr. Chair, some members of this committee weren't forthcoming about campaign donations received from the proponent and did not declare an interest at the beginning of the meeting. My own declaration of interest is that I'm a resident of Vanier and have been for the past 13 years. I live 900 meters from the proposed site. When I moved to Vanier, the site was a BMO branch with a Blockbuster Video across the road. Times change, so let's talk about the community's goals for this road. In 2017, Planning Committee heard residents' wishes during the Montreal Road mega shelter debate. Ignoring the mega shelter, which will do nothing to address our needs of affordable housing, what committee and council heard was that Vanier residents want a walkable, engaging Main Street. People talked about wanting a hardware store, a bakery, small independent shops. Residents specifically expressed support for Francophone and BIPOC-owned businesses. More public space for public use. There was no appetite for more car dealerships. I have to wonder why the city is so eager to give so much money to a car dealership when this land use would not be permitted just a few years ago, as it is odds with the traditional Main Street zoning designation. Why are CIP funds not earmarked for purposes fitting with TM zoning? Why is the maximum amount of the grant being considered for this site? Why is it we are not consider the public's desires? Is this the start and end of it, or will the city also be extending additional monies under the Brownfields program? If we assume that the current zoning stands, why not ensure that there is actually tangible community benefit tied to this parcel of land? Why not wait to rule on this until the site plan has been filed? Why not allow the Urban Design Review Panel to weigh in before determining that this is truly of community benefit? I fail to see how allowing a private seating area with a few planters and a small parking lot for luxury cars that neither I nor most of my neighbors can afford moves us into the space of community gateway. TM zoning allows more height than the current proposal demonstrates, so why not add affordable housing above? Why not give something back? Why not make the corner gateway space actual public space for the public instead of a glorified sidewalk parking lot? I care a lot about Montreal Road. It's 200 meters from my front door. I walk my kids to school on Montreal Road. I go running on Montreal Road. I hope it's someday safe enough to bike there. I shop at Montreal Road businesses from Kabul Food Market to Gerard's and Jean Coutu. I buy food from Hebesha, Host India, and Bobby's Table. I want my Main Street to be a place for residents to meet their daily needs. The fact that the proposed dealership isn't the kind with the wacky arm-flailing inflatable wavy tube man out front doesn't mean it meets the goals and interests of a traditional Main Street. We can do better. We in Vanier deserve better. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Okay, next is Lisa McLeod. Lisa McLeod. I think, hello, Lisa, you probably are asked this all the time. Are you Lisa McLeod?
For the purposes of this meeting, I am the Lisa McLeod.
You're the famous one. Floor is yours.
All right, thank you. As we stated, my name is Lisa McLeod. Thank you for the chance to address the committee today. I am a resident in the Rita Rockcliffe, Ward number 13. And so as a resident in the ward in question in which this application is being made, I speak in opposition to this motion. I don't recommend that FEDCO or Council approve this application. I took a look at the Montreal Road Community Improvement Plan grant terms of reference. speaking to what these funds are supposed to be used to encourage: urban renewal, development of cultural assets, to support businesses, including not-for-profit enterprises and cultural enterprises. It also mentions that applicants will be required to provide evidence that the project addresses an identified market need in the community. So the fact that the terms of reference for the grant provide the terms of reference also indicate that the project should provide additional benefits for the community, such as affordable housing, cultural activities, and support for social enterprise. So reviewing the application under these terms of reference makes it very clear to me as a community resident that renovating the existing car dealership into a luxury car sales floor would not contribute to any of these or to meet the terms of reference under this. One point that I particularly stuck out to me as an additional goal for this community investment grant is that it should contribute to the pedestrian friendliness. I invite the members of FEDCO committee to walk that strip of Montreal Road on a hot August afternoon or on a cold January day, perhaps on the way to a lab appointment, in search of a grocery item. And I think that you will agree with me that that placing a bench or a glass window in front of a car lot will not be enough to increase the pedestrian friendliness of that strip of land. Perhaps, as other speakers before me, and I'm sure others afterwards, will say there's much better ways that we can spend $3 million of the city's taxpayer money in order to invest in community in a way that will benefit all residents of this ward, and particularly those for whom this community investment is meant to target. Some suggestions could include bathroom access, amenities that keep in mind the needs of children, elders, and people with disability and their access to that space, and the pedestrian friendliness of transit access or sidewalk access for all of those people. We're in the midst of a global pandemic, so issues like food security, issues like affordable housing have become even more pressing than they have ever before. We've seen increase in housing prices, skyrocketing in this community. There's no way with respect to the applicants, I don't believe that this application meets the need to build a sense of community or an amenity that will bring all corners of this ward together. So I encourage you to vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Miranda Gray. Ms. Gray, let's see, I think I saw you on the screen there. There you are. The floor is yours for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me well?
Yes, yeah.
I'm here to speak against this as an individual. My concern is not the creative funding. I think the CIP program is good. If I believed the Porsche dealership would stay there for 10 years, it would make a reasonable way of financing this improvement. However, I suspect that this will turn out to be the wrong location in less than 10 years. And my worry is that we will not recoup the investment. My feeling is that rather than being a gateway, it will be more like a spaceship or a prison that is plunked down in the middle of nowhere. Looking at the site plans, I see no protection for these high luxury vehicles, and I suspect that will be a major concern in the eventual development of the site. I don't want to feel like I'm walking past a prison or some place that kicks me out, but I can see that there would be a need to protect the cars themselves. So my concern is mostly where this is being located. There are many places in the city that I think a Porsche dealership would be better placed. So to the Mark family, I say I understand why this site is sentimental to your family and why you want to put your premier dealership there, but it is a mismatch to the community. It does not fit. It does not fit this program because it does not bring return visitors that create a pattern of business in the business district. A Porsche is a one-time event. Even if you use your museum metaphor, it's still not somewhere where you go and you shop every week. So there are other places in the city I would suggest are better, where you will connect and live out your history of being part of a community and giving back. A Porsche dealership is just wrong on this site. It belongs somewhere else in the city. So I would urge you not to support this because I don't believe this will last the 10 years that you are talking about. I do not believe it fits in the program as set out. In particular, the 3 successful ones that your staff identified at the beginning all have the returning component as part of the feature. A restaurant, a strip mall, and a grocery store are all places people go to frequently. A Porsche dealership or even a regular car dealership is not somewhere you go every week. So it does not lift its neighbors, which is part of the plan of this program. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Des questions? Okay, next is Angela Keller-Herzog. Welcome back. Is Herzog here? Oh, there I see Angela. Welcome back, Angela. The floor is yours.
Okay, there we
Go ahead.
go. And
I can
yes,
barely
I
hear
can.
you. Speak up.
Can you hear me now?
It's a little better. Go ahead.
All right. So good afternoon. I would like to speak to this item very briefly as an individual and not representing anybody but myself because, well, I happen to be here anyways today for this FEDCO. So regarding the Mark Holdings proposal for building a 2-story Porsche dealership in Vanier and receiving a $2.9 million tax subsidy, I think that there would be 3 considerations that you might want to look at. 1, the rules. 2, the outcome, and 3, the unintended consequences and appearances. So number 1, we have to play within the rules. So the community improvement program is a versatile tool. The jury seems to be out whether the proposal does fully fit the terms of reference of the CIP. The proposal seems to be within the existing zoning, and the secondary plan is not yet in place, and the new official plan is not yet agreed. So it may or may not be okay under the present rules. Second of all, if we think about the outcomes, is this really the outcome that we want? Do we want a big Porsche dealership on this corner on Montreal Road in Vanier? I don't think so. I think this goes against what citizens have said that they want in the secondary plan consultations. And I think this goes against the idea of thriving 15-minute neighborhoods. A Porsche dealership is not an essential service or a business that you want or need in your walkable or bikeable neighborhood. And thirdly, in terms of unintended consequences and appearances, I think this proposal sets the wrong tone. The livable city that we're looking to build, and obviously I've drank the Kool-Aid on the 15-minute neighborhood, is one where we shift to active and public transit. The equitable city that we're looking to build sees public investment and incentives for building 15-minute neighborhoods, including in lower income neighborhoods. And money talks. So subsidizing a Porsche dealership to the tune of $2.9 million, it does set a particular tone. So clearly, this decision is within the discretion of FEDCO and then council. Otherwise, we would not be here with this agenda item. So over to you. Do you, with your vote, want to put yourself behind a massive subsidy to a Porsche dealership in a low-income neighborhood? Really? I don't think this is the city that you want to build. And I don't think that, especially you, Councillor Ralston, is what you stand for. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? No. Thank you. Our next and last speaker is Mark Kalowski, Chair of the Vanier BIA.
Hi there.
Welcome. You're going to speak up a little bit, Mark.
Sure thing. I think our executive director is also scheduled to speak, Mr. Mayor, but I'll just speak briefly. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Vanier BIA in support of this application. A lot has been said, and I'll try to stay away from repeating the arguments. The issue for us is very straightforward. The CIP was designed by staff in economic development, which I always say is world-class, over many years using lessons learned from previous iterations. The eligibility criteria were clearly set out, and Council approved the CIP in 2019 with no dissension. This application is not seeking a change to the eligibility criteria, yet there's public debate on whether this application should be supported. It sends a confusing message to our members when a councillor objects to a city design program that this council supported based solely on the name brand of the goods being sold. That this is a Porsche dealership is irrelevant to the argument. The annual sales of Porsche's parent company is irrelevant. It would be an impossible task to subjectively decide what value of products being sold would render an application ineligible for a building improvement grant. We all know that this isn't corporate charity to a company headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany. This is an incentive available to anyone and used by a local business, Mark Motors, whose worldwide headquarters are right here on Montreal Road. Many have spoken to the character of the Maraks, and their contributions to the community are beyond generous. I could go on about all they do, their investment in Vanier and across Ottawa, and especially their charity work with the Boys and Girls Club. But it should be irrelevant to this discussion. The goals of the program were to help spark redevelopment of a corridor that needs help, and this meets those goals. Mark Motors is very much a local business, whose principals live within 10 kilometers of the proposed building site, and who will keep the money in our local economy. Even though the CIP criteria don't require this, it's the exact kind of project we hope to support with this program. I'm frustrated by this narrative has taken over the fundamental issue. My big concern in all this is that this is the first application in this much needed program. And we're hoping to have 5 or 6 more applications be approved. If any potential future applicant sees negative feedback to this, will it scare them off from investing more in our community? And if it does, an important program will fail for the wrong reasons. That's all I have to say at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. We have a couple questions for you. Councillor El-Shantiri.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mark, not just for today, but for every day, your contribution to support the Ottawa Coalition on BIA and also on the local BIA in Vanier and the job you do. Mark, one question, and I really appreciate all what you said about the policy and about the program, but can you tell us a little bit more about the ripple effect? Like, I mean, the dollar's going to be spent on the construction and the people's going to be working in that neighborhood. And also we heard it's going to be double the amount of staff they're going to have. So if we have 40 today, they're going to have 80. But I'm just interested a little bit in a bigger picture of construction going of this size in a time of the pandemic, how much that would mean to the area.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. We've seen the estimate of $15 to $20 million investment in a brand new building right on the corner of Vanier on the entranceway. And from the documents I've read, there's talk of a 50% increase in the paid staff available there. It really frustrates me to hear some of the previous delegations talk about what Vanier needs and what they deserve. And we should be focusing on low-income housing, and we should be, looking at this and that. And of course, all these things are true, but there's also a sense of why can't Vanier have nice things too? Why when someone wants to build a Porsche dealership, do we have to say no, not over here? Let's go to Westboro or wherever, or Hunt Club, or so that the Maraks are interested in investing in this community for whatever reason, but for their personal belief system. It's important, and it signals an investment in Vanier, and it signals a confidence in the future of Vanier. I tend to fall along the side of people who buy Porsches, go back to that place quite often. They build their relationship-based organization. I do think it will spur a lot of interest in the area, if nothing else. And then the hope is them on one end, and at the Cummings Bridge at the other end, there's some more potential development that this will really help fill in some of the gaps in development that Vanier desperately needs. And this isn't to say that community housing isn't important. It isn't to say that social services and arts and cultural aren't important. But one doesn't have to exist in the absence of the other. So I guess that's my long answer.
No, but thank you very much, because some of that funding will be going to social housing as well. So I want to thank you for taking the time, and also thank you for your leadership on the BAA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a question. I did see Mr. Councillor Gower. No, my apologies. Councillor Lulaw.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Kaluski, for all the work that you do in bringing more business to Vanier and supporting the existing businesses. What would a denial of this application do to the uptake, do you think, of the Montreal Road CIP, something that you've worked very hard on? How would your member businesses feel or react to such a denial?
I appreciate that question as well. You know, to give a bit of history, Chris Cope, you know, who everyone knows here, is amazing, and he approached us probably 10 years ago to initially talk about this, and has spent innumerable number of hours, as have the volunteers on the board and our staff. You know, our executive director Natalie Carrier. We walked the streets. We've walked the street. We looked at every property. You know, we really, this isn't just some willy-nilly program that we say we hope people apply to it. You know, we've identified areas where this would really help. My concern, you know, as I brought this up is, you know, the MRACs were sort of the first out of the gate, and they put their hand up, and it's like this attack. How dare we do something nice? How dare we try to build and inspire and build something beautiful in this neighborhood? Will that scare off other developers from saying, well, you know, I have two competing projects, one over here and one over here. This one might cost me a bit more, but I'm not going to take heat for selling Porsches or, I don't know, high-end beverages or whatever is going to offend somebody else down the line in terms of an expensive branded product. And I find it frustrating. I think if we were talking about Toyotas, for some reason this would go away, even though Toyota's worth more as a company than Porsche is. It just it seems like a frustrating argument that we're focusing, you know, zeroing in on that. So again, to answer your question, I worry that it will hurt the success of the program.
You were very involved in the development of this this plan. You know, to the best of your knowledge, do community improvement plans discriminate based on brand name or ownership?
I've not seen that. You know, my understanding is the program is definitely available to anyone who applies for it. I don't see anywhere in the plan where there should be some discrimination based on the product being sold.
Does the Vanier BIA discriminate based on you know, ownership for membership?
Nope. If you're on Montreal Road, you're part of our association, whether whether you want to or not. But that's part of the nature of a BIA.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. And our last speaker is the Executive Director of the Vanier BIA, Natalie, who many of you will remember from 2017. Great work she did on that group with Guy Laflamme. Welcome, Natalie. Bienvenue. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor, committee members, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. The Vanier BIA supports the CIP program, and in particular, the application from the MRAC family-owned business, Mark Motors Porsche dealership. The CIP is essentially an applicant's self-funded grant, meaning that it is in direct correlation to the investment made by the applicant. Unlike what has been touted on social media, no funds from the current city treasury are being utilized for this grant. In fact, it's the opposite. The grant is essentially a freeze on commercial taxes following a substantial improvement and investment by the owners of a property within a designated area and municipal renewal project, which in this case is the Montreal Road Revitalization Project. The terms of this project are defined and approved by council. In social media, we've heard a lot about the name Porsche, but the name we haven't heard a whole lot about is the MRAC name. The MRAC family patriarch established his first business on the corner of Saint Laurent and Montreal Road 62 years ago. Since then, this family-led business has grown from a community mechanic to a world-class leader in the automotive industry. The MRAC family and Mark Motors will be transforming the footprint on the corner of Montreal Road and Saint Laurent, currently occupied by a tiny post-war building and a car lot. They will be investing over $17 million to build a state-of-the-art multifunctional building within our community. In addition, they will be allocating a portion of their land to ensure that we can continue the Complete Streets project that is happening on Montreal Road by adding in the bike track and the wider sidewalks, which were not possible with the current building that is there. Once built, their current property taxes of $25,000 annually paid to the city will go up to an estimated $355,000 annually. The CIP allows them up to 75% discount on that uplift, a sum of which has been estimated at $2.9 million. This $2.9 million would not exist if not for the investment being made by the MRAC family within the Vanier BIA. This grant allows the city a net economic gain that is 10 times greater than the current value of that property. No funds are being taken from important city mandates such as social services or housing to be given to this development. But in the long run, the city will collect 10 times the taxes on this property, which could, if council wills it, be applied to all the important portfolios within our community. Prior to the announcements of the CIP, the MRACs were considering possibly moving their current Montreal Road dealership to their land on Hunt Club. Thanks to the CIP, they were able to stay in the same location where their father opened his first business 62 years ago, Vanier. The MRACs have not only been business owners in Vanier for 62 years, but they have been tremendous supporters of local charities like the Boys and Girls Club, and not just our club, but the clubs across the city, the Royal Ottawa, and the National Arts Center. Though Porsche is the first and very public application out of this CIP gate, the CIP incentives, out of this, there are 5 or 6 other projects that we know of, because we've been working closely with Chris Cope, that we hope will also support, that you will also support, in the coming months. Some are commercial improvement projects, some are well-needed multi-use commercial and housing developments that include community spaces and great new ground floor commercial spaces, all of which are well needed on Montreal Road. I say this often before committees like yours. The Vanier BIA represents a beautiful, thriving community filled with tons of diversity. I do take slight offense to the way it's been described today, because we are more than just a low-income community. It is often misrepresented. Like many communities in Ottawa, we are facing very important social services and housing crisis that must be addressed. As part of this, the CIP program, as part of this current CIP program, we estimate that roughly 1,500 new rental housing units will be supported by this program and built along Montreal Road. The Vanier BIA community also faces an important economic development with physical renewal challenges. Many of our buildings are, like the small one being replaced by this project, are nearing end of life. Both the social and the economic challenges must be addressed. One does not preclude the other, and in the case of this decision, one should not prevent the other. We know the optics of this application are tricky, but please consider that what is essentially a sanctioned and planned offering of a commercial tax discount within a broader economic and physical renewal strategy is an important part of what we need on Montreal Road. We need buildings along the corridor to be improved so that they can actually be rented to small businesses. We need owners that care enough to invest in our property and improve these spaces for decades to come. Owners like the Mrak family. We encourage you to support this application, and I thank you for this time.
Great, thank you very much. Right on time. Des questions pour Nathalie? Questions for Nathalie? Councillor Gower, please.
Oui, Monsieur, merci, Monsieur le Maire, and merci, Nathalie. Actually, I was going to ask exactly what you covered in the last minute and a half of your presentation around the potential for other uses of the CIP, because I think there's a $25 million limit the council set in the bylaw a couple of years ago, and this project represents 3 million that we're discussing today. So there's still a lot of room. Maybe I'll hone in on one detail of that. When this CIP was approved by council, they lowered the minimum investment threshold from $250,000 to $50,000, which was intended to help encourage, I think, smaller developers or smaller business owners, make it easier for them, make it more attractive to them to invest. So you mentioned there's 5 or 6 possibilities that you're aware of. Do you know if of that in that mix, are there some smaller owners and developers? Do you think we're going to be able to reach that goal of encouraging smaller businesses and smaller property owners from being able to take advantage of this program?
I think Chris Cope is probably likely better suited to speak to who these are, and we don't know them until the applications actually come through to committee. What we do know is that there is a broad mix, everything from big developers putting up 3 or 4 towers of housing within our community with commercial multi-use ground floor spaces and community spaces. One in particular I know has given tons of consideration to what our community actually needs and how to put that in there. And there are also the smaller property owners that want to make a renovation, that want to change their facade, that want to add a floor or an expansion. So that is happening, and we definitely hope that those applications will come. However, to the point that Mark made earlier, I think it's important to say that this hasn't exactly been helping people want to really put themselves out there. I mean, if you think you're going to get this much brand scrutiny or community scrutiny for getting a break, I think it might very well deter people. And I also think that, the delegations that spoke in front of me speak very candidly and openly and importantly about the challenges that we face. We're not just one multidimensional thing. We have Rockcliffe on one side and MacArthur and Overbrook on the other. There's a lot of different dynamics and diversity in our community and a lot of different kinds of business owners. And we do hope that many of them will take advantage of this program. And also, I just want to clarify, it's a goal of 25 million that we will invest in this, not necessarily a cap. I have confirmed that with Chris yesterday. So we hope that, more housing developments come, and possibly we get a theater as well, and an arts center. I know Matt Luloff spends a lot of time on the arts and we work on those together, but we want to see that development. We've been pushing the economy of cultural, a social cultural economy in Vanier, and we want to continue to do that. But that doesn't exclude each end of the spectrum. You can have everything from a small African gallery and a Porsche dealership. Who says we can't have nice things, as Mark said?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm very interested from a Stittsville perspective. We have Stittsville Main Street, and a CIP is something we've been discussing as a possible incentive. So thanks for your feedback and your presentation. Thank you, Mr.
Chris Cope is the best asset for that, for sure. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, thanks, Councillor Gower. We're still on questions to delegations. Councillor El-Shantiri.
No, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I had my hand up for staff question. Thank you.
We'll come back to you then. Councillor Dudas, please, Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Natalie, I wanted to ask, we've been hearing a lot about, the economic benefits, obviously the property taxes that the city will be able to collect after this. And it was quickly mentioned at the beginning, but one of the things that most communities could benefit from is jobs. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate on the introduction of these jobs to the community and what that will mean for people living in the vicinity.
Councillor Dudas, I would answer your question by saying that there are significant jobs that will be created by this particular development, but there is also all the repercussions that will come from this kind of renewal that we will have. Once people like the Mracks invest in our community and say it's worth investing, other people take notice. And I think that is the biggest part of this incentive of CIP, is not to go and develop some field in, outside the green space, but to really densify our community. So I think that's really the jobs will come. There are jobs in this particular things. There's a lot of development that's happening along Montreal Road. A lot of people don't understand that currently the Montreal Road infrastructure, the below ground infrastructure that we're changing, actually prevents us from being to retrofit some of the end of life buildings that we have. So as an example, and I use this a lot, if you had a restaurant, you need medium to high flow gas to put in that restaurant because you're going to cook with it. Our infrastructure up until this revitalization had low flow gas. You can't put a giant building on low flow gas. You can't retrofit a building on low flow gas. So these investments are needed to be able to put in the businesses that want to come. I get calls all the time about people that want to come to Vanier. We have nowhere to put them. Despite the fact that there is vacancy on our street, it's a very misleading vacancy because the spaces that are available aren't retrofittable. They can barely be changed. And so we're constantly at odds of trying to evolve, but not having the infrastructure we need. So this program and these jobs that will be created because we need new buildings so that those businesses can move into those buildings. So, there's a direct impact with what the Mracks are doing, but also what they will bring in terms of growth.
Thank you.
I hope
so
that
much.
Answers your question. Sorry.
It does. No, it does. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Hubley, do you have a question to Natalie or to staff?
No, my question was for staff. I didn't realize you were already starting a queue for questions to staff.
Yeah, so we'll go to Councillor El-Shantiri. Anyone else have a question for the delegation?
I do, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Luloff, sorry. Go ahead.
Natalie, your passion for business in Vanier and your contribution to the East End, is felt all the way out to our community. We'd be much poorer of a community without that passion. We feel it very deeply in the East End, and I thank you for that. It's so important.
Thank you, Councillor.
When I look at Rideau to Montreal Road to St. Joseph, it's all the same corridor. And what's good for Rideau Street, what's good for Montreal Road is good for St. Joseph as well. It's the same economic corridor. You mentioned in your speech something about the amount of
I think we lost you
Did
there.
he freeze? Oh,
Matt,
I thought it was me.
Sorry, we'll just have to, Matt, I don't know if you can hear me, but there you go. You're on.
There he
Oh,
is.
did I cut out? Sorry. Yeah, you mentioned in your speech the amount of housing that could be supported by a project like this, and I'm wondering if you could just reiterate that one more time for me.
So what we know is that in our community, and when I talk about the Vanier community, some people get very stuck on where Vanier begins and ends. I talk about it in the terms of the Vanier BIA, which is both sides of MacArthur and both sides of Beechwood and everything in the middle from the river to Saint Laurent. What we know is within that space, and if you include Hemlock, there is roughly, I would say, close to 7,000 or 8,000 units of housing that are being built in the next 5 years. Some of those projects are on Montreal Road and would and could and might qualify, if approved by you, for housing. I know of the ones I referred to, which is the 1,500, are 2 tower type residential rental buildings that have been proposed for Montreal Road, that we've been consulting on, that the community is consulting with the proposed developers on. And just within those 2 buildings is roughly 1,600 units, 15 something hundred units. We need that on Montreal Road. You can't have a prosperous economy if you don't have densification. You know, I mean, New York survives in 15-minute neighborhoods because there are enough people within 15-minute neighborhoods that can support those businesses. We don't have that right now on Montreal Road. And you know, the revitalization of Montreal would change the sort of throughway traffic. I'm glad you talk about the corridor, because for the longest time, it's almost a highway, right? From Orleans all the way to downtown and back. And so the changes that are being made to the traffic flow and those kind of things will also have an impact on our business. So, you know, there's a lot of housing coming in and there's a lot of housing that's needed. And we hope that these CIP applications do come through for those housing projects, and that people that are building housing also get the benefit of investing in our community. You know, it shouldn't matter how much money that person holds, you know, whether it's one of the big MRAC families of the world or a small investor, it shouldn't matter. The program was created to entice people to better their buildings, to entice people to include social, community, and arts programs on top of investing in their buildings. And that, I mean, you know, you either have the program or you don't have the program. But if you're going to limit who can and can't access the program, it becomes a flawed program in my mind.
I really, really appreciate.
MRACs didn't start off rich. Somebody somewhere started with a tiny little mechanic shop and invested in that small business on a main street and grew it into a massive empire. So, you know, I mean, who will the next MRAC family be? I hope they're going to be on Montreal Road and they're going to stay there.
I hope so too. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that happen. And I really, really appreciate you coming out to speak to this item. I'm hoping that we can hear from the 2 local councillors that have large chunks of Montreal Road in the CIP today. I'm very interested to hear what they have to say. And thank you.
You're well represented by them for sure.
Indeed.
Thank you, councillors, very much for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Lulov. Next, we have, so any other questions to Natalie before we go to staff questions and comments? No, okay, so to staff, thank you, Natalie. Merci, Natalie. We have Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
This is questions and comments.
Question and comment all at the same time. Okay, we'll do that. Well, if I may, Mr. Mayor, maybe I can call Mr. Herwire back and to explain a little bit more about the application, because I think there's misunderstanding somewhat about this application, and I think some people seem to understand it as a policy, and this is an application toward the policy. So if staff can come back, and Mr. Herwire or Chris Cope can tell us a little bit more about the program and the benefit of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps I'll start and Mr. Cope can add. So certainly, as I mentioned in my presentation, the application conforms to all the requirements of the Montreal Road CIP program. It's within the geographic area. It meets all the criteria. You know, looking at the site, it's certainly going to be an enhancement to the current property, which is needs improvement. So the cycle tracks, the pedestrian improvements, the the plantings along Montreal, especially Saint Laurent Boulevard, are going to be positive additions to the community. So it clearly meets the test, passes the muster in terms of the council approved criterion program. And Chris, if you want to add, I'll let you jump in.
I'm waiting for Chris Cole. I think he's going to speak, but he's on mute.
Chris, you're on mute.
Chris, you're the IT guy. Come on now, just unmute.
Oh, okay. I was clicking the button in one spot and it wasn't working. Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to add to this, but just to talk about this specific program, it really has two main thrusts. The first thrust, and the one we focus very intently on, is the urban renewal aspect, where we're looking at existing property owners to upgrade their properties. And this was the thing where Mr. Herwire mentioned earlier about bonusing, and this is not called bonusing. It's not called bonusing because council approved the specific area, and they made that approval under a section of the Planning Act that says it must be applied to existing property upgrades and not greenfields or new things kind of stuff. Now, that does include taking down a building and replacing it with a new building is seen as an upgrade. Now, in addition to that, we also have aspects to support housing, to support cultural enterprises and not-for-profit enterprises. And these would actually help an owner get a larger portion of the tax increase. Not the case in this particular application, but certainly well worthwhile. This particular application hits the main buttons. It is providing a very, I think, tremendous upgrade on that property at the corner. I think it'll go from being, a very old property to something that we can be proud of at the beginning of the Cartier-Vanier area. So.
And just to add, Mr. Herwire, this program also offered to area, I think Saint Joseph Boulevard, offered to Bell's Corner. I believe we did have something in Bell's Corner similar to this program here. So it's not who's applying, it is if the application fit the program.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. We have programs, as the councillor mentioned, for Bell's Corner, Saint Joseph, Montreal Road, the first application here, and Orleans. And as well, we also have everyone's familiar with the Brownfields CIP and a recently adopted Heritage CIP. So it's a tool that's very valuable for the city and to the city, and we certainly hope there'll be increased uptake on the Montreal Road corridor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Herwire and Chris Cope, and I want to thank all the folks who came in to speak to us today, including the Marax family and their consultant and all the residents who spoke about this. I also like to thank my two colleagues, especially Councillor King, for his positive support to the application. And I know he's supporting the policy more than anything. And I'm grateful for that. But I'm so I don't want to age myself because John Harder will be happy to hear me say this, but someone who spent a lot of time at the corner there, Maple Leaf Hotel, and because a family member used to own a motel there, the Mirada Inn. So I can tell you that corner has not been changed probably in the last 50 years. So this application will make a fundamental change to that corner. And I'm glad to see a local family doing this and local business who's striving to add more staff into the area, who's going to bring construction dollar to the community and also jobs when needed, especially after the pandemic. So, Mr. Mayor, I would encourage my colleague to support this application. This more than anything, and I know we hear, oh, this is about the Porsche or whatever car they're gonna sell there. That's not the point of contact. I think even if they were selling hamburger and hot dog, I'd still be supporting this application because it fit our policy, and I think we should be focusing on our policy. And for someone who's from the far west part of the city, maybe I shouldn't support it and ask them to move to West Hunter Club, be closer to the west end. But my heart is in the city as a whole, and this is a policy of a city, especially fit to that area. So I will be supporting this, and I will encourage you to support the program and the application. And I want to say thank you to Mr. Herwire and Mr. Cope, and especially the BIAs for their strong support of this application. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri. Councillor Hughley, please, comments and questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have one question for staff on the program itself, the CIP for Montreal Road. The one that was done earlier for Orleans, one of the things that we had put into the CIP was that it could not be used to take jobs from another part of the city to move to one part. Now, I know that doesn't apply here because they weren't actually located at Hunt Club, but I just want to make sure that that's still a requirement within the CIP program as they become popular. We want to make sure it's not used for stealing jobs from one end of the city to the other, that it's used to bring new jobs and new development into the city.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd ask Mr. Cope to respond to that question, please.
Mr. Chair, the Orleans CIP was designed specifically around job creation. We were hoping to attract significant employers out to Orleans so we could get some of our transit traffic going the opposite direction instead of Orleans residents coming downtown. Because of that, we were concerned, since we were offering an incentive that was based not on the just the assessment increase, although it had to do that, but we were actually adding the incentive based on the number of jobs that companies would create in creating these projects. And it was very important that we didn't end up robbing Peter to pay Paul, so pulling from one side to the other. In the case of the Montreal Road CIP, there is no requirement to provide jobs. And so we haven't set that rule in there that they must only be in that point. However, having said that, expanding a business, or as the Maracs are trying here, will create additional jobs right in Orleans. And I think your point is very well taken. Any of our CIPs as we move forward that are intended to create jobs need to have that requirement that they not be transferred from other areas in the city, that they be expansion or new companies coming to that market.
So do we need to do a direction today, Chris, to get that into all the CIPs, or is that just something staff will undertake based on this conversation?
Mr. Chair, staff will be doing this anytime we're doing a CIP that's designed for job creation. And the reality is I'm working on one right now. It'll replace a couple of existing CIPs with one broader CIP, and it does have a job creation component in it. And I've already written in the language to make sure that we don't move jobs around. So I certainly don't think we need a direction, because I think, to be quite frank, I think it makes common sense. And
one would hope it does, Chris, but common sense can become quite rare these days. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That addresses my concerns, and I'll be supporting Councillor King on this development in his area. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor. And Councillor King, you're next. Questions and comments.
Thank you, Your Worship. And many of my colleagues around the table here have asked the questions and provided clarity in terms of some of the concepts that I would have asked. So I'm going to just really note and provide some comments. And as the ward councillor, I would acknowledge that a large challenge confronting our municipal government today is stimulating renewal and economic development in areas that require it with the existing constrained financial tools that we have at our disposal. As a consequence, I've been consistent in my desire to see the city provide incentives to local business in economically challenged areas. I've always maintained that that's what we should be doing. And that's why I supported the development of the Community Improvement Plan at Council in 2019. I think that was probably one of the first votes I probably undertook to stimulate new investment and property upgrades in a business area which has long suffered from neglect. It is important to note that in ordinary circumstances, Council is prohibited from incentivizing enterprise through assistance that comes directly from the public purse. And we've heard that. And I fully agree with that. I mean, I would be the first person, if we had the opportunity to remove money and give it to businesses, to vote against that. Scarce tax dollars should benefit our parks, social services, affordable housing, or social housing, and allow us to maintain, upgrade, and expand infrastructure. These dollars need to be protected, but they also need to be expanded so that we can continue to improve and really enhance those types of investments. I think it is important to emphasize that this grant program creates a set of special circumstances that allows the city to see the continued improvement of an area that has historically experienced underinvestment while concurrently expanding the tax base so that we can bolster our investments in parks, in affordable housing, in social services, and infrastructure. Grants, and I know that there was a lot of misinformation that was floating around. Grants under the Community Improvement Plan are designed, therefore, not to draw upon the public purse. To be explicitly clear, the grants are not a cost to taxpayers and does not negatively impact the city budget by drawing allocated dollars away from social services or infrastructure. In fact, these grants ultimately constitute a net economic gain for the city. The grants come directly from the grant applicant through the increase in property taxes as a direct result of the redevelopment itself. To repeat, this is applicant-generated revenue. In essence, the grant earmarks a portion of the taxes that arise from the new development and redirects these revenues to incentivize that redevelopment. These grants are not paid in advance, but are linked to the development of the project and subsequent enhanced property. The grant is also structured so that if the development does not proceed, the grant is not paid. The goal of the grant program is to unlock economic spin-offs that ultimately add to the municipal revenue stream and the economy as a whole. The grants are open to a wide variety of businesses on Montreal Road who comply with specific criteria, and this application complies. The particular grant application before us will generate an extra $1.9 million in development charges and permits, approximately $97,000 in extra property taxes each year for the next decade, and will generate an extra $363,000 a year in additional property taxes each year after that. These are real dollars that will bolster the tax base and, at the will of council, can be directed to grow and improve services and infrastructure. In terms of wider economic impact, the project is estimated to provide $17 million in economic spinoff, which includes construction and employment, jobs. It should also be of note that this is the first CIP application before us. Other applications will be forthcoming, and they can be varied since the criteria of the grants can include support for affordable housing, nonprofit entities, and cultural assets. If we are indeed seeking to improve economically challenged areas, it will be necessary to undertake a multifaceted approach to improvements. While this should primarily include investments in infrastructure and social services, I believe that in order to substantially improve economically challenged areas, we must also concurrently require substantive investments in economic development and jobs so that we can create a virtuous cycle where improved growth through employment and increased property value provides the city the additional resources to make additional investments in our social service infrastructure. Finally, I believe that we need to make such investments at this time to assist the city's COVID-19 economic recovery efforts. Montreal Road is challenged at the best of times. We need to ensure that its recovery is bolstered. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. That was, I have to say, a very clear and precise and well communicated set of arguments. I know you put a lot of time into that, as you did with your comments in the report. And I think it really crystallizes and clarifies to some people who may have thought this is a direct subsidy to a particular company. So well said. Councillor Fleury, I know when I put this in my campaign brochure, you were a very enthusiastic supporter of the CIP coming to Montreal Road, so you pushed hard for that. So here we are with the first application, so congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor King, and thank you for everyone who signed up and spoke today. I'll start with maybe 2-3 questions to Chris and the team. Chris, can you maybe share with us the goals for the CIP as it relates to how many properties are we looking to see renewed and benefit from this program? I know you have a number of them. I've had public meetings, so they're on the public record. That'd be Main and Main at 2 Selkirk. That'd be 112 Montreal Road with the Agrawal family. That'd be regional. And I know there's some that extend further into Councillor King's ward. Can you maybe give us some insights on what would mean success for this program in coming years?
Thank you, Mayor Watson. When we did our original research and as Mark mentioned, walked up and down the street, that kind of stuff, we ultimately created a list of some 77 properties along Montreal Road that we thought any one of these would be quite likely to be a grant applicant as they would go in. And we were looking at things such as, their age, in some cases dilapidation, in other cases simply the use was not the highest and best use on the site. There were certainly possibilities. Certainly the COVID situation has changed. I have an active list of about 15 property owners that say they're going to do something. A number of the smaller ones, and this question was asked a little bit earlier, but a number of the smaller ones, and these are particular small, that has one or two maybe retail units on the ground floor and maybe an existing floor up above. I think we'll see 3 or 4 of those properties develop with 4 or 5 floors above as affordable housing, with retail continuing on the ground floor, although that is changing and the retail market is soft. And so I think we'll need to get a little farther along on our COVID recovery before we see these little ones happen. But the owners of these properties are still talking to me. Certainly the larger properties that you mentioned, and the Main and Main one will probably be the first one we'll see. I expect to see an application for the CIP from them in June or July, concurrent with their site plan application. Regionals maybe a little farther along with theirs, but regional is going to be, and actually both of these, because the Main and Main includes about 50,000 square feet of retail. And that retail will be providing some of the things to enable this 15-minute neighborhood. I think most of it will be food related and food and service related. So I know they are talking about attempting to find local or if not mom and pops, businesses that actually resonate in the community rather than the corporate giants kind of stuff. Now they may or may not be successful because leasing is what's going to drive that. Regional Realties have not decided on a project yet, but it's quite likely it'll be mixed use. And again, include residential and some component of that, possibly affordable, likely some active uses on ground floors and possibly even some office. And so I think the interesting thing is that this particular proposal from the MRACs is like a bookend on one end of the Cache-Vanier zone. What we're going to see this summer from Main and Main will be a bookend on the other end. And both of these relatively distinctive, relatively largish projects, but the ones in between, I think, are the ones that will be stimulated by this new growth. And adding to that, what we're spending on our renewal of the roads and the infrastructure in the site itself, it's going to begin to start this process of changing the street. And so what would be success for me is probably within the next several years, and we're likely talking 3 or so, but to see 5 or 6 interesting applications. And I think that will start the so-called snowball off the top of the hill, and we'll see others. And in some cases, others that won't be grant recipients, but they'll want to join, might be just painting the front of their store and they wouldn't be eligible under the numbers, but they would get on the bandwagon of renewal.
Okay, and then my final question to you, Chris, relates to there's a lot of information on the grant, so on. Just so I understand, if today my property, say, is worth $1 million, I pay about $10,000 worth of property tax. As I plan to rebuild, and if I happen to be within the CIP, specifically on Montreal Road, I build something and it increases in value. Say my property value is worth 10 million, so it's tenfold. So I'd be technically paying $100,000 worth of property tax. The grant or the model program basically freezes my property tax increases to that period, to the pre-construction period for 10 years. Is that, I mean, the granting and the model around it is more mechanics of how that works, but is that fair to say how that's really the intent?
Mr. Mayor, it's pretty close to the mark, except that we do not provide the incentive in the form of a tax abatement or a tax reduction. we provide this in the form of a grant that is paid to the owner. And there are a number of reasons for this, but I think the most important reason might be in commercial properties. Most of these property owners have net leases. So if we gave them a tax reduction, they would have to pass the tax reduction on to the tenants, which would be good for the tenants, but it doesn't do anything to put money back in the pockets of the developers that are making the investment in the renewal. So we would like this grant to be something that gives them incentive to go ahead and build and help them with their pro forma so that it actually makes financial sense. We use taxes as a way to calculate the grant. We look at how much are the taxes going to go up when he finishes this work. And that in ordinary circumstances would be a disincentive. If you want to build something, but it's going to throw your taxes up, that actually works against your decision to do it. So in this case, we calculate the grant amount based on how much your work is going to increase your taxes. And in the case of Montreal Road, we would provide you with an incentive equal to 75% of that increase each year for a maximum of 10 years, or until we hit 50% of the money you spent on the actual redevelopment kind of stuff, or another cap of $5 million. And so this actually, the math on this works for small properties and large properties because it's based on the tax increase. If the tax increase only goes up $50,000, then what you probably invested to do that is considerably less. If you spend, as in your example, 10 times the amount of $1 million project, it'll be very significant and you'll be approaching a fairly large grant.
Thank you, Chris. So, Mr. Mayor, for my wrap-up comments here, plusieurs le savent, moi, je suis impliqué dans la revitalisation.
I'm involved in the revitalization of the community for several years. If you go on the website ottawa.ca and you write Vision Vanier, you'll see the series of initiatives that took place in the community. We're all working together with the residents, with councillors from neighboring wards and the commercial zone. The objectives of the CIP is that we want a renewal of this corridor. I remember before it became an Audi dealership, it was a General Motors Belle-Île. And after that, it remained vacant for several years and a family came here. And now, as you know, there's an old bank that was on the corner. And through the development of Montreal Road, we had the opportunity to have a standard for the sidewalks and bicycle lanes. So since the zone has said that, as it was said, that there'll be 100 more people working in these areas, that will be of great help for all businesses. So I recognize the importance of the CIP. My colleague and I, Councillor King, worked together in the past few days simply to clarify the intent, understand the purpose of the program. And I thank everyone participating today. Everybody had good arguments. The social, economic issues and support the community are truly valuable, are good for investment in business and in recreation. So we want to help our local businesses on the main street. So it's our first application. I hope we'll get more. And we're going through the construction work impacts too, but I continue to encourage the business people on Montreal Road, and maybe we'll end up eventually with a more welcoming street for the community. Thank you, Councillor Fleury.
I'll just offer a couple of comments. First of all, thank you to our staff who worked very hard on this project. As you know, Council unanimously passed the CIP for Montreal on June 12, 2019. And Chris Cope, Don Herwire, Cindy Van Buskirk have all worked very, very hard. And I know they've worked with Councillor Fleury and Councillor King, whose areas are most positively affected by this proposal, and who have both offered their comments of support. This is, I have no desire, nor do any of you, I suspect, have a desire to subsidize a car dealership or any kind of business. But I do have a desire to work collectively in different parts of the city, particularly those areas that have economic challenges, to help them attract more and better businesses and services on an important street like Montreal Road. And there's been a lot of misinformation about how much money this is going to cost. I think Councillor King spoke very eloquently exactly what this program is all about. It acts as a magnet for economic development. And over the 10-year period, the cost of the CIP is $2.9 million, but the city gains $3.9 million. So there's the math. We're $1 million ahead just on that first tranche. Secondly, over the 10-year period following the CIP, where the average tax being paid for on that property now is $35,000, it will go up to approximately $450,000, 1,100% increase in property taxes coming back to the City of Ottawa, so we can then invest in social services, affordable housing, better infrastructure. And Montreal Road, I believe, is on the cusp of something really special and really great. I think it's going to be the new Hintonburg. It's going to be the new Old Ottawa East, the multi-million-dollar revitalization along Montreal Road. And I think, as Natalie pointed out, the difficulty in attracting some businesses for something as simple as not enough gas capacity for a restaurant. So you're going to see a tremendous uplift on the whole street, because the street, quite frankly, was long overdue for revitalization. And Councillor Fleury and Councillor King and their predecessors worked hard to get that money in the budget over many years. And we have to go out, by the way, just as an aside and a bit of a sales pitch, go out and support those businesses on Montreal Road, because the street is dug up. There are challenges with construction projects of that nature, but coupled with the pandemic and the curbside challenges, we need to really go and support some of those great businesses along Montreal Road. We need to, as every politician in the country and the world is saying, build better. We need better businesses. We don't need more pawn shops. We don't need more cash stops, money shops. We don't need more cannabis stores or tattoo parlors. We need to attract more businesses that will bring more jobs and more economic growth to that important part and that historic part of the city. Alors, j'espère que tout le monde va appuyer cette
So I hope that everyone will support this project. It is a very important project for the east end of the city. I'd like to thank everyone that spoke during the meeting, and the 3 members of the staff who worked really, really hard on this file with Councillors Fleury and King.
Carried. Thank you all very much. Motion to adjourn. Carried. And availability will take place in 15 minutes at 3:45. The conférence de presse, ça commencera dans 15 minutes.
Media availability will start in 15 minutes. Et la prochaine réunion?
La prochaine réunion, c'est le 1er juin 2021. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.